17, 17. God. 17, 21, 17, 21, 17, 21. Jesus, 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 save me. Jesus, save me. Jesus, save me. Hi guys. I don't know if any of you are aware, but I released a video called Obsessive Compulsive Disorder and the Horror of Intrusive Thoughts. I come out with certain stories in that video, and I think while we're in isolation and there's nothing to do, I thought I'd revisit some of those stories and perhaps sprinkle in some other things too. And this video isn't scripted, as none of mine are really, although usually I put notes in front of me or something. This is entirely freeform. So everything I'm saying in this video is basically talking off the top of my head. So I'd like to go back and talk about some of the things that I experienced with OCD. And I'd like to start with my childhood and work my way forward. So going back to when I was 4, 5, 6, I had, I think, harm OCD. And I'd have these sudden urges to hurt people or to hurt animals. And it was strange. The feeling would just come on me all of a sudden. And I can remember once, my sister Catherine, I can remember punching her in the stomach. And she was 8 years older than me. And I think at the time I was about, 7, 8. And I can remember punching her in the stomach and just running. Because if she'd caught me, I would have looked out. And I can remember hiding in the street above. And I was there for ages, just hoping she'd calm down. And, because back when I was a kid, I was a little bastard. I really was. But I wonder if the OCD was part of that condition. But I was always very afraid of loss from a young child. Terribly afraid of loss and losing the people I loved. And even back then, I didn't like change very much. And I can remember when my mother moved in with my biological father for a couple of months because my older sister moved into our house. She was in between homes. And I didn't have a very good time down my biological father's house. I didn't even know he was my biological father. I just thought he was my mother's boss. But I can remember when we got back home after a huge argument that they had, I can remember I felt like a male version of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. And we were watching TV, me and my mother, back at our house. And I can remember I was just sobbing and sobbing. And she turned around and she said, "What's the matter, boy?" And I said, "Ma'am, I'm just so glad to be home. I'm just so glad to be home." Little did I know, 18 months later, my mother would marry him. And I'd move down his home, which would change my life forever. But the fear of change was there from a young age. The urge to hurt. And I'm going to tell a story now, and this is it's hurting me really to tell the story because I'm a big animal lover. But I can remember in my mother's home, we had animals and budgies and stuff. And I can remember being about 5 years old, throwing seed into the cage, and the bird died. The bird must have had a heart attack or something. But I can remember that, and that still bothers me to this day. That I took a life, and I didn't mean it. I didn't know the bird was going to die. But that really bothered me. I can remember at Christmas, my sister Claire, who was 6 years older than me, she'd have a pile of presents, and so would my sister Catherine and Andrea. And my pile be up here, because my biological father had his own business and I was spoiled. But I can remember once arguing with my sister Claire. And I can remember she had a transistor radio. And I grabbed the radio. And I can remember running up the steps. Like a step ladder. And I was defiant. And I said, come near me or the radio gets it, you know. And she said something and I threw a new radio down and smashed it, you know. I was very destructive. I can remember destroying my brother's, what they called a radiogram. This is back in the day. My sister Catherine, I threw her clogs on the fire. And, or one of them. I could be very harmful. But I was also a very loving child. So it might have looked, well, I don't know what it would have looked like, but it might have looked almost schizophrenic, but it was just OCD. But it wasn't known back then, and it wasn't, you know. But I was always very afraid of change. And I used to have silly little habits, like, you know, I talk to my toys. Or I talk to my bedroom, you know. But I can remember reading the Bible back at 9 years old. And that instilled fear into me, you know, to be good. And in some ways, or at least that's the way I interpreted it. And in some ways, maybe it did, maybe it didn't contribute to my OCD. I tell you a strange story. I'll never forget this. I can remember, and this is, I wouldn't say it's spooky, but it's a strange story. I can remember being out my backyard, and I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I had carrier bags full of cars, little toy cars. My sister used to work in a toy factory somewhere, and she used to bring these cars home, and I had bags of them. And out the backyard, we had a little drain, and I can remember pushing these cars into the drain. And out of nowhere, and I swear it to this day, although it was probably a mental trick, it was probably just something that I misinterpreted, but I can remember a voice, and it sounded like it was coming from the sky, and it said my name. And I was looking round and whatever, and it was just that one episode. In the street across from me was a dear man who I loved, a guy called Vic, and he was an invalid, and he was only 50 at the time, I think, but to me he was an old man, very old, and I think he looked older than his years because of his condition. And he used to have what they called a bubble car. And he used to take me everywhere in this bubble car. You know, he took me off my mother's hands for an hour or two. I used to go everywhere with this guy. And he was like my father in a way. He was more of a father to me, ironically, than my other two fathers. And I remember once we were outside this scrapyard and he was inside talking to quite a famous scrapyard owner. I'm not going to say his name. But he was a champion power lifter and champion arm wrestler, been on TV and all the rest of it. And he was a buddy of Vic's. And I can remember going inside, and in this bubble car, I always remember there's 4 little lights. And the key was near the lights. And Vic said to me, do not turn the key when I'm gone. I'll only be a few minutes. And of course, what did I do? I turned the key. And I fucked things up, and the vehicle wouldn't start. And I can remember having a smack for that as well. But I always remember the guy, the bodybuilder guy, or the powerlifter guy, lifting the back of the car up and doing something underneath to get it going. But the thing is, I felt an urge, an impulse to turn that key, a compulsion. And I just had to do it. You know, it's... And going into my teen years, I had strange things where I'd have to touch certain objects. There was no anxiety. I just had to do it. I just had to touch things. And like... I touched the spoon one way and then I'd have to touch it another way. But it didn't happen all the time. It just happened now and again. So I'd have these silly little things that I used to do. But it's funny, you know, you look back and you think, what drives you? What drives you to do these compulsions? And I don't know if it was necessarily true with me, but from a young kid, I always had that feeling of loss, of afraid of losing. And I can remember when I was 11 and my mother said to me one day, I'm getting married. And I said, no, you know, because I'd spent 9 months down my biological father's house and I was glad to be away from there. And I kicked up such a fuss. She said, okay, calm down. And I thought that was that. But then she went off to Gretna Green in Scotland and got married. And when I found out, I was absolutely devastated. It was like I'd lost my mother. Even though I still had her, it was like I lost her. But strange, I had a dream before that of her and my biological father, Jock, as he was called because he was Scottish. I had a dream of them both driving into clouds, and I could hear this Scottish bagpipe music and the feeling of abandonment I felt in that dream. And then they went and got married. You know, when I was 11, because she moved in with him and took me and left my sisters to be looked after by my older brother in the house that I came from, in that short amount of time, for a kid who's afraid of loss, I lost my school because I moved up to high school. I lost some friends. I lost my home. I changed my family. And my identity was changed when I found out that my sisters were really my half-sisters. So that feeling of loss was made worse. But the thing is, you get on with things when you're a kid. You just do. It's funny, when I was 26, I went out with a girl who was 9 years older than me. And she used to take a lot of speed, okay? And I had never tried this before, and I wanted to try it, and she told me no. She didn't take a lot of it. It was just recreational with her. But I then had to find out, and I started taking speed. And I already had OCD, which I didn't know about. I was always uptight. I had anxiety, stress. I was always very suspicious of others, so there was a little bit of paranoia involved. So of course, you take speed, and what happens? And then we eventually split up. And when we split up, I took more and more and more of it. And it turned my mental health problems even worse. Then fast forward a few years, I went out with 3 women back to back. And one ended after 10 months, 11 months. I was devastated. Then I went on to someone else who was a beautiful looking woman. And that ended. Then I went out with a girl called Emma. Emma wasn't that good looking, but I was very fond of her. You know, I really liked her. But because of the losses, I went into a deep downward spiral, out of my speed on drugs, my mental health off the chart. And then I had some experiences that shocked the hell out of me, frightened me. And I become excessively paranoid, and I give up the drugs like that. And I celebrated. I bought myself a new computer. I was so proud that I'd given the drugs up. And when I think what I put my poor mother through. But what I didn't know, because I took a job working nights, and this is the famous story in Obsessive Compulsive Disorder and the Horror of Intrusive Thoughts. I started taking ephedrine. I was in this place called ECM Squared in Port Talbot, and I didn't realise the effects of ephedrine. I know I went out with Hayley and she took it, and her mood swings were all over the place, but I didn't know anything other than that. So when I took ephedrine, or stack 2 as it was actually called, with ephedrine and aspirin and all that stuff in it, I didn't realise what it could do. I wasn't taking it to get high, I was taking it to lose weight. And I was doing 14-hour shifts, about 4 or 5 times a week. And I would walk endlessly through corridor after corridor. You know, I used to have a couple of routines. I'd either do 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off. Or I'd walk for a whole hour or 2 hours and then have the same off, and then walk again and have the same off. But once I started taking these ephedrine, I wasn't content, because you start taking 1 tablet, which you're only supposed to. But then I was taking 2 tablets. And then I was taking 3 tablets. And one night I had this huge, I call it a breakdown, but in truth, I don't really know what it was. I think it was a massive panic attack. It was a huge panic attack. And I was never the same after that. And my whole thinking became, have anyone ever watched a movie where, you're looking through the eyes of a drunk, or you're looking through the eyes of somebody that's just been hit, or you're looking and everything is morphed. I remember watching Rocky 3, right? And I know, it's a bit corny me saying this, but do anyone remember watching Rocky 3 at the very beginning where Paulie, the camera's like looking through Paulie's eyes and he's in this arcade and he smashes the arcade up and he gets arrested and he sobers up in his cell? Well, when he's in that arcade, everything is sort of morphed. Well, that's how my reality became when I started taking ephedrine and developed mass pure OCD after taking those tablets. And everything was morphed and out of shape. And it was almost like as if I was pulled back into my own body. Have you ever looked at binoculars the wrong way? Everything seems so far away and distant, cloudy. And I used to have to walk through these corridors and I'd have to walk a certain way because I thought if I didn't, then my mother would die. All my friendships suffered when I was outside of work because I became very argumentative with everyone. But a lot of that was due to all these books that I was reading. And I think at one time I counted up how many spiritual and self-help books, because I really got into this. New Age, Law of Attraction, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay was a big one. Napoleon Hill. And I think I read, and I'm not joking, somewhere between 30 and 50 books, maybe more. And I was cramming all this information into my head. So I had all these intrusive thoughts swimming through my head, and I was adding more intrusive thoughts by reading all these books and I was trying to change myself. And books and positive thinking and all the rest of it. And the thing with positive thinking, I don't know whether anyone's actually aware of it, but it can be extremely dangerous. But I can remember one book that I think it was You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought or something. But what it was saying was that positive thinking is bullshit, right? Positive focusing, now that's different. It's like when you do exposure and you're exposing yourself to your fears. Like in the case of you HOCD guys, it's kind of like you confront your triggers, that's not positive thinking, but it's necessary to get to where you need to go. So what that is positive focusing. Positive thinking, which is what a lot of, and I'm not bashing Louise Hay because I'm sure she was very good. But when you're saying, I am perfect, I am good, I am great just as I am this and I'm that, and I am my perfect me, and the world is beautiful, and this, that, the other. For an OCD person to say, that might work for other people, but for an OCD person, that's like kryptonite. Because an OCD person strives neurotically for perfection. And to give yourself these self-affirming perfectionist things is only making it worse. And that's what I was doing. If you can imagine that there's a carpet here, and do you remember that episode of The Simpsons where they took the piss out of Mary Poppins, but they had Sherry Bobbins, and she was just fucking lazy and she was brushing the stuff under the carpet? Well, with positive thinking, oftentimes that's what you're doing, is you're brushing all what you need to confront under the carpet, so it remains inside you. And the more positive I was trying to think, the more I was suppressing what needed to come out. And I was in a fucking mess. I was in a serious psychological mess. And I don't know if anyone believes in psychics. I don't mind whether you do or whether you don't, but all I know is I've had some experience with them. And just like good plumbers and bad plumbers, a good carpenter and a bad carpenter, you get good psychics and bad psychics. But I was really concerned about myself, and I rung this psychic in South Wales. And I think he was a guy that was like 28, 30 or something. He sounded quite young. And when I phoned him, I was on one of my walks in this place, walking through all the corridors and what have you. And I can remember going out into the back of the building, outside, outdoors, and talking to him. I got the picture in my mind as I'm talking. And if you type into Google ECM squared Port Talbot, it'll show, I think there's a couple of pictures there. And I can remember saying, hello, how are you? And I said, I'd like to ring you up for some advice. And he was in work. He was at his desk doing whatever. But he was gracious enough to talk to me. And he said, I got your father coming through to me, he said. Jock. And this is over the phone. I never met this guy before. And I said, yeah, Jock is what they called him because he was Scottish. Yeah, and he said, I feel that you've gone into the swamplands mentally. He said, everything is clouded and morphed out of reality. But he said, you will come out of it. You will come out of it. And I spoke to a couple of psychics who actually said the same thing. Some people called it the wilderness. Some people called it, But he said I would come out of it. But it took many, many years for me to come out of it. I mean, the way they were talking, I was going to come out of it, within a couple of months, but it wasn't. It was years before I came out of it. But I think there are things within the New Age which may be okay. There may be truth to the law of attraction. And I want to say something before we start. I often think sometimes maybe I've experienced it. But what you have to understand is at the time I was suffering so badly with OCD and this business of thought action fusion where you think that if you think something, you make it happen. I took the law of attraction in a negative way. And I felt then, after reading all these books and the pure raw was kicked in like 100%, I was terrified it could make things happen. So when I used to think about my mother dying or having an accident, I thought I was going to make it happen by thinking about it. And it caused serious fucking distress. Serious distress. And I often talk about my cat. When I used to picture my cat being run over, I used to think I was going to make it happen just by talking about it. And but I've come to understand, and if anyone out there is listening to this and is worried of, they've gone down the same road that I've gone down, and they've studied law of attraction, and they have OCD, what you've got to understand is the law of attraction comes from intention. Positive thoughts are 1,000 times or thousands of times more powerful than negative ones. You won't affect the law of attraction with negative thoughts because the only thing you'll do is stop the positive from happening. So you can't make anything happen just by thinking about it. I mean, okay, this is my dog Henry. Okay, say hello to Henry. Okay, I'm going to move Henry now with my mind, okay? I'm trying, but I can't do it. You know, I don't know. Use a book. I put the book on the floor. I'm going to try moving this book with my mind. I can't do it. Try it yourself at home. Try moving something with your mind. It can't be done. So this thought action fusion was a massive, massive problem for me. All through reading and misinterpreting the law of attraction. If the law of attraction actually works. I don't know either way. I think sometimes I've had very positive experiences with it. But that can be a debate for another time. The point is, I advise anyone to stay away from the New Age. To stay away from anything that's even remotely magical. Or, you know, in inverted commas. Get a down-to-earth approach. And I tell you something very interesting. When your thinking is so extreme, one of the best ways to I found anyway, to counteract that is to go to the opposite. So when my magical thinking was really bad, I thought, you know, I got to do something about this. I got to brainwash myself. So I thought, I know, I'll brainwash myself with the total opposite. So I started buying books by Richard Dawkins, and who's a scientist. And I started reading books by Richard Dawkins. I was buying DVDs on Richard Dawkins. I was watching YouTube videos on Richard Dawkins. I started playing games to stimulate the logical side of the mind. I was playing lots of Sudoku and various other games, falling blocks. What's the other one? Solitaire. Anything to stimulate the logical brain. And I did find that over time, that helped. That helped with what I didn't know was called thought action fusion back then. But that's what it was. And while I'm on the subject, I do suggest you buy a book called Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts. You can get it in paperback or Kindle. Top book, highly recommended. Don't think about it, just buy it. Trust me on this, okay? So, yes, the whole New Age through everything, you know, it took my morphed reality and my morphed senses, and it you know, the New Age stuff made it worse, because I tell you what else I was doing as well. I bought audio books on, you know, Louise Hay stuff and all these perfectionism affirmations and all the rest of it. And I'm not bashing Louise Hay. I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure she's very good in her own field. And other people, some, you know, you haven't heard of. There was Glenn Harrold, hypnosis, Paul McKenna, hypnosis, and all these affirmations. And I'd literally brainwash myself with an MP3 player as I was going round. 14-hour night shifts, constantly on my own. Reality morphed out of all perspective. Listening and brainwashing myself with books and audio tapes and everything else. And I remember in 2006 going to see a medium by the name of Austin. And he said to me, It wasn't a very good reading, really, because I wouldn't shut the fuck up and give him peace to do what he needed to do. But he did say to me, he said, you've been living more up there than you have down here. He said, you were totally ungrounded. He said, it's almost like as if you're living from spirit. He said, you feel pulled back into your body. I said, yes. I said, like looking through binoculars the wrong way. And he said, you're not fully back here, in a sense, in physical reality. He said, you were living up there. And that's exactly how I was. Everything was so morphed. It was like as if I was looking down on my body in a way than actually being in life. I wasn't living life, I was just surviving. I tell you what, guys, I was in a fucking mess. And falling out with everyone. I was learning all these new age things and learning all this and learning all that. And one of the boys on the site, on my Facebook forum, said, very good point actually, Jay I think it was, said that when you're continually reading self-help books and spiritual books, you're chasing something. So it's a non-acceptance of who you are. And that's coined exactly right. Because a lot of these books teach you to accept yourself, especially Eckhart Tolle and stuff. He's quite good, mind. I do recommend a book called A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. But when you're reading all these books, you're really not accepting yourself. Some of them are trying to teach you that. But with me, instead of concentrating on one book, I was reading the book, throwing it, where's the next one? And I was hoarding and hoarding and hoarding all this information. And can you imagine, almost like an internet connection, like a Wi-Fi? Can you imagine, have you ever watched Netflix or watched something or put something on that's 4K and your TV just can't process it? The processor isn't strong enough in your TV or in your computer. And I just couldn't process the sheer fucking volume of information that was coming through my head. And I think that's partly where I went absolutely cuckoo. And one thing I do remember, I don't know about you guys, but I've always been a person that's talked to himself, right? I've done it since I was a kid. Not overly so, but, people do talk to themselves. And if they don't, they tell you fucking lies. Everyone does it. But under the influence of these tablets, I was talking to myself all the time. And there were people that work by day. Oh gosh, it's embarrassing. I'd walk around, I'd go into work at like 4, what was it? Yeah, about 5 o'clock or something, and work till about 8 o'clock the next morning, or 6 till 8, I think it was, yeah. And sometimes I think that everyone was gone. And there I'd be with my headphones on, listening to this new age stuff or whatever. And I'd be fucking talking to myself. And I'd walk into rooms and there'd be people there. They must have thought I was nuts. Because technically I was. But they must have had a real good laugh, at my expense. And I've never been embarrassed like that really before. But it was a really bad experience. And when I finished that job, because licensing came in, I deliberately didn't take my license, so I knew they'd lay me off. Because I felt I couldn't finish on my own accord. I felt a compulsion to keep going in. But I knew I had to get out of that life. And when my license ran out, I was laid off. I came off the tablets I came off the stack too. But I had done myself so much damage internally up here that even though I may have morphed back to reality a little bit, I was still incredibly fucked up. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I began the Richard Dawkins books. So there was a huge chunk in my life, where my behaviour was very repetitive. And even now, I find my behaviour repetitive. Although not quite as bad in some ways, in most ways, as it was. And certainly the intrusive thoughts are not there like they were. But I had to expose myself to things. And sometimes you can expose yourself in life naturally without even realising it. You know, you could be shitting yourself because you're starting a new job. And I know a couple of people that have, you know, that are like that. They shit themselves. They panic. They can't sleep. They toss it and turn in. But when you get into a new job, you'll be nervous the first day and the second day. But you will expose yourself to the situation and your anxiety will calm down. And I've always said that is very important in life, is not to run from your triggers, but to run to your triggers and stay in the situation until it calms down. Like if you're afraid of bridges, you might have some poor brave soul that will run over the bridge despite being afraid, but he's still running. It's still more admirable than not going near the bridge, but you're still running over it to get over the fear quickly. But a sensible person would sit on the bridge, sit down calmly and stay there until the anxiety subsides. You've got to stay connected to your triggers, not run away from them. But it's funny because when I look back at that terrible period in my life, I remember I had to walk through a corridor and I had to jump up and smack this thing. And I had to repeat certain phrases, repeat certain numbers. I had to walk in a particular way so that my mother wouldn't die. And, you know, I'd be Googling and checking on the internet and everything you can think of to do wrong, I did. Mass compulsions, too terrified to stand up to the compulsions, constant reassurance, absolutely terrible rumination, pure raw, intrusive thoughts, rumination. I had it all. That's not to mention anxiety. And it was like I was living out of my body and like cloud. Like driving through a country road on a cloudy, rainy day and you can only see so far in front of you. I was just a total fucking mess. A total mess. And you know what? Nobody understood me. I was alone. Very alone. Very, very alone. Alone with my fears. Totally ashamed. Having this perfectionist macho complex where I couldn't admit that I needed help because I had to be strong. And that can be another compulsion sometimes as well. The need to remain strong. And sometimes it's better to break down and cry and reveal the fucking truth about yourself to yourself than it is about living a lie as Mr. Macho. I can't, you know. This is why I think women are much better as a general rule of thumb, because they don't have that macho thing getting in the way. They can break down and they can say, you know, I need fucking help. I need fucking help. Will you please help me? Will you please help me? And, you know, they can progress and do better, go further, because they're willing to put that macho bullshit out of the way. With guys, you know, back in the day, I had a reputation for being, I wouldn't say I had a reputation for being the toughest guy in the world. I did have very sporadic courage and very sporadic confidence. OCD related, probably. But the macho thing, the perfectionism, really got in the way. And that's how my recovery started, with brainwashing. I thought I've brainwashed myself to a point with all this crap, all those books I read, all those fucking positive affirmations which were making my OCD and perfectionism worse. I had to re-brainwash myself. And that's how my recovery started, when I began reading Richard Dawkins, books on skepticism. And I read a number of books on skepticism, even debunking psychics and stuff like that. And even though I got more of a healthy attitude now, and I know what I've experienced with a lot of them, I just wanted to go all out against everything I believed. Because, do you know how I did it? Do you know what gave me the idea? Wife swap. The program Wife Swap. And I'll tell you about it now. You're gonna have to excuse me. I love vaping. With Wife Swap, and because I dipped into cognitive therapy, with Wife Swap, I watched the UK and the American version, and it's about families who switch lives. One wife goes into another man's home, and one wife goes to the other man's home. And I always used to wonder. I wonder if there's some serious fucking going on, you know, behind the scenes. I wonder if those couples are actually having affairs and it's never shown. But anyway, that's just a random thought. I could see that they'd have one rich family, one poor family, one spiritual family, one atheist family, one family who were, you know, boring, one family who were very unruly. They'd have the polar opposites, and they'd put them into each other's lives, swap, and there'd be arguments and resistance and whatever. But that started me thinking, well, that's really healthy. It's really healthy to walk in somebody else's shoes. Something and not a lot of people can do, by the way, which is why people don't understand OCD people. But I thought, what a fucking brilliant metaphor that is. So I thought I'll start reading books on skepticism and everything, you know, that's contrary to what I already believe. Do you know my mother always said, and because I took my mother's house over after she died, there is where she used to sit. That was her spot. And my mother always used to say everything in moderation. And what did Jessie do? Fucking total extremist in everything I did. And so I began brainwashing myself with all this stuff. And it really started to help. Because the paranoia, it wasn't just the OCD, but it was the thought action fusion, the paranoia, believing I could make things happen with my mind, suspicious of everybody and everything. And I think I was a naturally suspicious person anyway, so it just made it even fucking worse. And the Richard Dawkins and the the Sceptic books really started me on my journey after watching that wife swap. And then I went more into, exposing myself. When I got a job then, which I had for 6.5 years, going out into the public, I didn't really like the job, but it was putting me in the public. That acted as a little bit of exposure on its own, because the job I had in Port Talbot was totally isolated on my own. Like everybody's going through with the coronavirus, being stuck in. That's what it was like for something like 22 months, I think I was, in basic isolation, walking those corridors. So I had a job then working with the public, and that brought me out of things a little bit. And nobody could understand me, and I wasn't in a position where I wanted to talk. And I fell out with my siblings. I fell out with these. I fell out with that. I ended up being friends with my siblings again, but they must have thought I was a fucking whack job. But there was so much deep shame. I was so ashamed. I'm supposed to be this big tough guy. I'm over 6 foot. I had... Do you know the thing with me? Is it was never so much I was a tough guy, but I beat tough guys. I'm what you would have called a spoiler. I spoiled other guys' reputations, because these guys with reputations, they'd pick a fight with me and I'd beat them. But I didn't beat them because I was that good. I beat them because they underestimated me. And, I had this image to live up to. Fucking worst thing ever. Do you know, it's better to break the fuck down and cry to somebody you can trust and say, I need help. Don't store everything up the way I stored it up. Because do you know what takes guts? Isn't acting like a fucking tough guy, or isn't having this macho image. Having guts is being able to break the fuck down. Break down and confront yourself. I can't take it anymore. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't cope anymore. Having the guts to admit it to yourself. That's the first step. When you're acting like a tough guy, you're not really facing yourself. You're wearing a mask. But what happens is with me, I integrated into that mask so much that I didn't really know who I was, and I mixed myself up terribly, So I would say, and I'm in danger of losing my train of thought here. So if I do, I'll have to cut and so forth. But it's basically have the courage. Because do you know what else takes courage? A buddy of mine, Gary, he had and still has, as far as I'm aware, OCD without the compulsions. And one of his core beliefs was, I'm not a man. I'm not a man. And he started arguing with everyone and so forth. And I said to him, do you know what, Gah? I said, you were so hung up on this, I can't, I'm not enough of a man. I said, but you have a tough guy with a fucking wife beater on and tattoos and goes around beating people up, who's probably on the fucking unemployment list or has a low paid job or something, all boots and no fucking brains, your typical thug. I said, oh, you could have you, who's a non-violent guy, a sensitive guy, who gets up in the fucking morning and goes to a well-paid job, works your tits off for 45 hours a week or whatever it is he was working, coming home, looking after 3 children, providing for them, providing for his missus at the time who was unwell mentally. And she did a lot of speed, which is, I think, where she perhaps got, you know, that contributed. I said, you've always been responsible from the time you're a child. You know, you put bread and butter on the table. That's a man. That's a man. Not arguing and being fucking tough, because his thinking had become very black and white. And his thinking had become very rigid. I could see it in him. I could see when he was talking. And so being a man isn't about being fucking tough. A man is about putting bread and butter on the table for your kids to eat. That's a man. You know. So I would say, especially for the guys, tackle the macho thing, tackle the black and white thinking, tackle the perfectionism, tackle the overgeneralization of things, you know. Yeah, so that's what I got to say about that, really. So anyway, just to recap, I often call it accidental exposure. I'm sure people who've watched my videos have heard me talking about accidental exposure. But it wasn't necessarily accidental. I think it was from a book, and I think it was this book called Anxiety Depression Workbook for Dummies. I think I'd read that, okay? And I've also got, while I'm at it, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Dummies. But I think it was that book, and I'd sort of dabbled a little bit with the exposure technique. And I wonder if I can get to the page. And I dabbled with the exposure. And you know, but I was a bit iffy about it, you know, a bit. But it wasn't until my sister came home, because my mother was basically on her last legs, and my sister came home, and I bumped into a mate of mine who was doing carpentry work in a shop. And he just unlocked this fucking memory in my head. And I went home, and my sister, Alison, had come home. And it just gave me a renewed confidence in a way. And I had all these compulsions before going to bed. I had to read the Bible in a certain way. Get on my knees, get off my knees. Get on my knees, get off my knees. Get on my knees, get off my knees. Walk around the bedroom, walk back. Read the Bible. Not happy with that? Read it again, read it again. Drinking like fuck as well, alcohol. And I just knew it was like something was telling me. The bus is passing. Do it now. Just fucking do it now. Because these compulsions were there every night before I was going to bed, and they were seriously impacting my life. And I may do a video where I'll take you up to the bedroom and show you. But anyway, I just didn't know the compulsions. And for those of you that have heard this story, you know, forgive me for saying it again, but this is for a new audience if anyone's watching. And I just didn't do the compulsions. And it was all my, what the fuck is going to happen to my mother now? What's going to happen to my mother now? Here I am, this guy, and you know, I'm the first person to admit it. I'm not the best looking guy in the world. Far fucking from it. But boy oh boy, I did okay when it came to women. And here I am. At the time, no woman, suffering with all these mental health problems, paranoia, terrible paranoia, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety, stress, alcoholism, doing these fucking stupid compulsions before going to bed. And that's what I was reduced to. And I was in bed refusing to do the compulsions. And I thought my life was going to end. Everything I hold dear was going to be laid waste. And I was crying. I admit it, a fucking grown man. I was crying in bed. Screaming. And at one point I was screaming, "Shut the fuck up," to my sister downstairs because I was in such a panic and I just wanted to go to sleep. And how I could get to sleep, I don't know, but I did. And I woke up and it forever changed the way I think. And my OCD had gone from like 100 down to like a 5. Yes, I still had intrusive thoughts for those people that worry. You know, it's called a backdoor spike. But the thoughts were kind of like, you know, if somebody threw a rock at you, it would hurt, wouldn't it? But if somebody threw a piece of paper at you, it's still throwing something at you, but it doesn't hurt so much. Well, that's what the intrusive thoughts then became like. I didn't have many, but when I had them, you know, they were like nothing. The emotional intensity, I just didn't believe in any of that crap that I had. It all went. But it was about 10 minutes getting out of bed that I realised, and I'd only been sleeping for about 4 or 5 hours, I realised that, fucking hell, it's gone. And I put this thing, and this is another thing going back about people, how people don't give a fuck because people got their own shit to deal with. I remember making this announcement on Facebook, like anyone gave a fuck. You know, and nobody cared. It was like having, can you imagine buying a brand new car and you're really, really proud of this car, or you've just had your degree and you're so proud of yourself because you got a B+ in this degree, or an A- or, you know, whatever, and nobody gives a fuck. That's what it was like. I'd beaten it. I'd fucking beaten it. And I was okay for a couple of months. It was like coming out of prison. I beat it. But I noticed that they started to creep back after about 7 weeks. And of course my mother was ill, having bouts of illness. She'd have bouts of illness periodically. And the thoughts started creeping back in. And creeping back in. And tell you something I've noticed. Tell you something I've noticed personally over all the different stages I went through. I think good sleep can help with OCD. I think lack of alcohol, lack of caffeine, I think a lot of it is what you're putting in your body. And I think a person needs to tackle thinking errors to conquer anxiety. And this is not necessarily OCD I'm talking about, it's anxiety. It's, you know, when you change the way you view the world will change. You know, because change doesn't come out so much out here, the change happens in there. You know, it's almost like the observer effect in quantum physics and stuff like that. When you change your beliefs and change how you see your world will change. If you see everything as an enemy, then that becomes your reality, in a sense. But if you changed how you think, challenge your own thinking, challenge it. And when you challenge it, the externals will take care of themselves. You know? So, yeah, I slipped back into it. But the point is, with all my ups and my downs, I never quite took my mind as seriously again. And when you're dwelling on something, which is basically when you've got intrusive thoughts and you have a fear of being gay, or you have a fear of being able to move things with your mind and all that fucking crap, or with its contamination, OCD, or whatever the type. When you dwell on something, you're creating a block. But the problem with obsessions is that they dwell themselves. You don't have to even fucking do anything. They just happen. That's an obsession. But when you dwell on something, you create a block. And Billy, a friend of mine, he failed to get it up with a red head. And when he was about 18 or 17, no, 19 I think he was, he failed to get it up with a red head and developed HOCD after that for many, many years. And he wrote a story recently. He didn't write a story. What he did, because he had a little relapse recently, he decided, he said to himself, what am I ashamed of? And I actually wrote a post on my forum to do with shame. And he thought, well, what am I ashamed of? And he looked at certain events in his life. And he wrote the story about what happened to him with the red head. And he got over that macho bullshit, and he just started talking. And he said to me, he said, fuck. 4 or 5 hours later, I was up again. And do you know what? I often think that it's, aside from OCD, he just become obsessed with not being able to get it up. And it created a block. Because the more you think of what you don't want, the more of that you'll get. So when you dwell on fear, you're blocking yourself. And so I think there was a couple of obsessions going on there with him. Because the thoughts of being, maybe I'm gay, didn't happen until about, I think it was 2 years after that event, I think he said. I'll have to ask him again. But up until then, he just thought he was impotent. But he just started dwelling. Oh, I won't be able to get it up. I won't be able to get it up. I'm not normal. This doesn't happen to anyone else. It happens to thousands of fucking people. But he was distorting things. He was making a mountain out of a molehill. He was magnifying the negative and disqualifying the positive, which is another thinking error, by the way. He was overgeneralizing. He was expecting perfection of himself because he thought that when he was 19 and he was going to go with that redhead, he considered himself an old man sexually. All his friends had lost their virginity when they were 16 and 17 and took the piss out of him. And when he got to 19, he thought he was an old man and he was very ashamed. He was very ashamed of the fact that he was 19, losing his virginity. Or trying to lose his virginity. But, you know, he wrote the thing and saying that, you know, and he got some outside perspective. You know, I was young, I was 19, I wasn't really an old man like I thought I was. I was under a lot of pressure, he put, because he showed me the thing to read. You know, I thought I was the only one, but the truth is many other people have gone through this. I was so deeply ashamed, he said, and embarrassed, and this shouldn't be happening to me. This shouldn't be happening to me. The should statements. You know, it's but writing that helped him have an outside perspective, and his fucking old boy was up again. Because when he gets these attacks of HOCD, it even affects his masturbation, apparently. I don't want to get too graphic. So his sex drive increased once he started writing. So writing about everything that you're ashamed of, overcoming the macho thing, or the pride, or the dignity, that will help in bringing... And I know Eleanor, a friend of mine, she runs my Facebook site, along with Jay and Maria and what have you. Eleanor believes very much in inner child work and loving the self. And I think one way to love yourself is to tackle the thinking errors that are stopping you from being confident. And I think another way is to tackle shame. And I think whatever you're afraid of in life, whatever you're ashamed of in life, write about it. And write about it. If one of your friends was suffering with something, what would you tell them? If somebody came to you, your son, your brother, your friend, who was 19 years old and said they couldn't get it up, if you were a total fucking ignoramus, what would you say to them? Oh, you fucking loser. You should be fucking ashamed of yourself, not being able to get it up, young boy your age and all that. Do you know who would say something like that? A fucking animal. A human being, and somebody who's more in tune with truth and compassion would say, it's no big deal. If you didn't, just because you failed this time, and it's not even failure, it's just a non-start. Just because that happened this time, doesn't mean it's going to happen again. You know, I threw a fucking dart at a bullseye once and I missed. Does that mean I'm going to miss it the second time or the third time? You know, when a baby learns to walk and it takes its first step, this precious aspect of consciousness, this perfect aspect of life, takes one step and it falls over. Does the baby say to itself, oh fuck, I fucking fell? You know, you adult motherfuckers, you promised me that I'd fucking walk. And just give up and take it personally? No, the baby don't know stuff like that. It only knows how to keep going like the little engine that could. So the baby falls and gets up and takes 2 steps. And then maybe in the next week or the next month, it'll take more steps. You know, so this business of perfectionism is a load of bollocks. You know, how would you treat somebody that came to you, like I said, And that's the way you should treat yourself. You know, look at things from an outside perspective and write about shame. Everything you're ashamed of. Everything that you daren't say. Write about it. And look at it from another perspective. And after Billy wrote that, he thought, you know, fuck, I'm a human being. That looks like the writings of a human being. None of us are perfect. None of us are ever going to be perfect. And quite frankly, I don't want to be perfect. I do want to polish up some of things that I do wrong. But I'm quite happy to celebrate in the land of imperfection. Because as long as I can put good vibes out there, I can fall and get up and fall and get up and fall and get up as many times as it takes to eventually get to where I need to go. Face your fucking fears. You don't have to do it perfectly. You could do it in your own time and at a pace that's suitable to you. But remember, guys, when you got a choice, there's a fork in the road. When you get a choice to run away from anxiety, run away from your triggers, or you got a choice to face them with imperfection and mistakes, but facing them regardless, always take that fork. And I'll just say this before I go. When I first developed OCD, mass OCD, which is, what happened to me while I was working nights. I had two very strange dreams. One dream I've spoken about already is when I woke up as an old man and my life had gone. That dream was about not facing fear. Another dream I had, and I always wanted to put this into a video, but I kept forgetting, was my OCD, paranoia and everything had kicked in from taking that ephedrine, and I had a dream that I was in my local park and I was in the presence of this huge presence. Spirit, I don't know what it was. But I around this spirit, I thought it was my father I was talking to. But according to a medium, it wasn't. But this presence was a loving presence and about the size of a tree. It was huge. I was like an ant. And it had this circumference of light, which I was I was inside. And I just felt love. And this presence was communicated to me instantly. It was instant communication. It was like somebody was firing a dart into my head and the information opening up. And when I was talking to him, the information, it was the same. I was communicating to him instantly and the information was just, he was receiving it straight away. And when I woke up out of the dream, it was so real. And I couldn't remember really what he was saying to me. But what I always remember him showing me was a fork in the road. It was like a V shape, a fork. And, you go through a period of misinterpreting things. And I think if that dream was real, and if that really did happen, then what he was saying to me, I think, was, because I was always a person that believed everything was predestined and free will was bullshit. But I think what he was teaching me in that dream was it's actually the other way around. You could turn left when you should have turned right. And you could turn right when you should have turned left. Decision is the mother of change. And I do believe that there's certain things that are set out for you in life. But I think it's actually more about free will and a little about destiny. I think life is 80% free will, 20% destiny. That's what I actually think. And I don't know why I felt the need to tell you that, but I'm telling you it anyway. And when it comes to OCD, standing up to your fears, which fork in the road you're going to take? You're going to carry on the reassurance. Don't do what I did. Don't wait all those years before you stand up to anything. Because it's better to win ugly than it is to look good losing. Go down the path of, if you go down the path of least resistance, still doing the obsessive, the obsessions, the compulsions, the reassurance, and all the other crap that goes along with it. Or you can go down the road less travelled and stand up to what's frightening you. Do that. Better to win ugly than not to win at all. But once you go through the Stargate, once you are completely willing, and notice I said the word willing, when you are willing to put everything on the line. If you're afraid of being gay, be willing to be gay. You're afraid of germs, be willing to be dirty. Or whatever you got. When you're willing and it causes distress, it's better to have the distress and the pain now for a short time than, and have a clear run than it is to run away and take this path and you'll still have pain 30 years from now because you haven't confronted your fear. Anyway, guys, it's time for me to go. So take care. I know I was slow starting in this video, but it's a lock-in, and I just hope I've been able to share some things. So take care, guys. Good night. God bless. Bye.